So I've just returned from a holiday with my wife to some amazing locations, and of course, whilst I was in those locations, I did a little bit of watch holiday shopping. I didn't end up buying anything, but I certainly went and tried on some amazing watches that were on my list of I wanted to see them. I also took two watches with me. I took my Mont Blanc Nicholas Roussek and I took my Christopher Ward Series 1 Dartmouth. I thought they would be two good watches to take with me. They weren't exactly the watches I thought I should take. Well, the Christopher Ward I thought I should take, but I was a little bit unsure about the Mont Blanc. But I ended up going on this amazing holiday, and today I want to share with you some of the watch-related aspects of this holiday, but also just a little bit of my holiday. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches. And this is a slightly different episode because there's a little bit of my holiday mixed into this sort of watch-related episode. I've tried to squeeze the watches in as much as possible because, well, this is a watch-related channel. Now, I do want to apologise for some of the footage that I'm going to show today because I have been trying to squeeze the watches into it somehow. So it is me looking a little bit awkward, looking at a watch, looking at a nice view. I'm working on this. This is something that I want to do in the future. Not very often, but create some content around some of the holidays that I go on to, which won't be very often, but I kind of like the idea of capturing my holidays and not only sharing it with you guys, but also having a bit of a record of this holiday for myself and my wife. But this particular trip, it was really cool because I did a few things. I went to Melbourne, I went to New Zealand, and then I went to Brisbane. In Brisbane, I caught up with my father, and then I came home. So it was a bit of a round trip. And the first place we went to, as I said, was Melbourne. And one of the main reasons I wanted to go to Melbourne was because of the watches that are available there to see. Within Australia, there's a few good places to see watches, but in my experience, Melbourne is the best. It has the most shops, it has the most variety of watches to see. And the first watch that I was desperate to see, that I wanted to see in hand, was this Glass Chute Original. I'm really taken by this design. It's by no means a cheap watch, so I just wanted to get some hands-on experience with it, and they had them on hand in Melbourne. And I was really impressed by this particular watch store as well because the salesman was amazing. He let me try on these amazing watches, more so than just this Glass Chute, but I was able to try this one on and I was really happy to try it on. There's also a place called Time and Tide, which has some great micro brands available, and I got to try on the Studio Underdog Watermelon, which is a watch that is very hyped up at the moment. People talk about it and they've been talking about it for some time now. So actually to be able to get some hands-on experience with it was really good because it is the kind of watch that realistically I would just have to normally buy without seeing. So being able to get some hands-on on-wrist experience with it was really worthwhile doing. But something that really surprised me out of this trip to Melbourne was Bremont. Bremont watches aren't a brand that I've ever really considered before. In fact, I walked past the Bremont store about 4 times before I thought, well, maybe I'll just have a look whilst I'm here. And I was really impressed, partly by their watches. There were some really cool watches that they had, but I was really impressed by the customer experience. I sat down, I was chatting with these people. They were really knowledgeable about watches. They were very knowledgeable about the Bremont watches, and they gave me some free whiskey. As much free whiskey as I wanted it. In fact, not that I took on that offer. I just had one nice glass of whiskey whilst I chatted about watches and I spoke about their watches. And one thing that I really do like when you go to some of these watch stores, not all watch stores are like this, but some of them have some amazing salespeople who are obviously watch enthusiasts themselves. I was wearing my Mont Blanc for this entire sort of time when I was looking at watches in Melbourne, and you could tell the watch enthusiasts because their eyes just lit up and they went, wow, what is that? That's very cool. Some of them even knew what it was and they wanted to talk more about my watch than the watches that I was there to check out myself. So it was just a nice experience. Nice to see that it wasn't just a sales pitch, but it was also a bit of a watch experience with them. We were only in Melbourne for a couple of nights before we then flew to the South Island of New Zealand, flying into Queenstown. And flying into Queenstown was a really interesting experience because as you come into the land into Queenstown, you actually start flying down in amongst the mountains, which I've captured here on the video a couple of times. And it was just a very surreal experience flying in a plane and looking out the window and seeing the sides of mountains. It was beautiful, interesting, and it was a really cool landing. It was a really nice place to come into. I've been to Queenstown once before, but it was many years ago, and I was really excited for us to revisit Queenstown, partly there to do some things, but also to see what watches they may have on offer in that town as well. And I was actually a little bit surprised about what watch stores they had, because online I only sort of could find that they had a Breitling store. As it turned out, they actually had quite a few watch stores. But the first thing we did when we got to Queenstown was go up the gondola, up one of these mountains to this amazing restaurant, which really surprised me because the food was amazing, but the views were even better. It was amazing to be up there, see these views, get some video of the mountains, get some videos of me feeling a little bit awkward looking at my watch, but also have a nice meal, have a drink up there, enjoy the views. And you can probably tell by now that it was a little bit cold up there on that mountain. It was a little bit cold in New Zealand as a whole, ranging from about 0 degrees up to about 10 degrees centigrade. Now, what was quite interesting about this experience was we then intended to get back on that gondola, go back down the mountain into the town to have a bit of a wander around, but there was a technical problem with the gondola. We waited around a little while and we then realized that, well, we could keep waiting, or we could just walk back down that mountain ourselves. And that's exactly what we chose to do. We enjoy hiking and walking, and a lot of our holidays do involve this type of activity, so we were perfectly happy to walk ourselves down the mountain. It was an interesting trail. It took us a couple of hours to get down. We made a few wrong turns because there were a couple of signage issues. Didn't get lost, but sort of walked down a particular pathway, and within 100 meters or so I realized this is not the right direction, so we turned around. As you can see, I'm still wearing my Mont Blanc at this point in time, which probably wasn't the right watch for hiking. I wasn't intending on wearing my watch with a leather strap when I went hiking. That's why I took my Christopher Ward with me, so that I could wear a metal bracelet. But because I was caught out not realizing we were going to go hiking, well, I ended up wearing that Mont Blanc down on that hike back down into Queenstown. After this hike, we then worked our way back into town. We were only staying right on the outskirts, so it was less than a 5-minute walk into town. And it was really nice to see Queenstown again. I don't think I had a really good memory of Queenstown in my head. I sort of knew about the mountains. I remember the sort of the fjord lake thing coming in there, but I don't really had a good picture of what else was there. And it's very much a tourist town, but it was very much a tourist town that was set out very well and very pretty. Beautiful little coast there, little beach. There's a really nice sort of big park that you can go for walks on as well, which we did, which was really nice. We had a nice lunch overlooking the water. And of course, then I had to visit some watch stores. And as I mentioned, I only thought there was one watch store, Breitling, because when you look online, there wasn't immediately obvious that there were other watch stores. But of course, it had lots of watch stores. So it was nice to then be able to check out Breitling, but it was also nice to check out some Cartier, which I'd never tried on before. Not that they grabbed my attention a huge amount, but it was just nice to be able to try them on. But the watch that actually surprised me the most was this Zenith Defy. It was a watch that I sort of was interested in seeing because I just wanted to experience it, but it wasn't something that I ever thought I would actually want to own. And although I probably don't want to own it at this point in my life, it drew me more than any of the other watches that I tried on that day. It sat really nice on wrist. It was very comfortable, it was very, very well made, it was very interesting, and it just grabbed my attention. So it was a really nice watch. It has sent me down a bit of a pathway of Zenith, trying to see if there are any watches in the future I might own. They're not particularly cheap, so let's see how that one goes. But it was then time to leave Queenstown. We hired a car and we started driving south. The next stop we had was in Tayano, a slightly smaller town to Queenstown, still a little bit of a tourist town, but definitely much smaller. And it was a really good jumping off point to then drive up to Milford Sound. Milford Sound is probably one of the top tourist destinations in New Zealand. Even though they call it a sound, technically it's a fjord, and they have boat trips. You get to jump on a boat, these big boats, these cruises through the fjord, look at these massive cliffs, these waterfalls, these beautiful mountains coming down into the water. And it was a really nice experience, both being on that boat, seeing those sights, seeing those waterfalls, seeing the gorge that you were technically sort of going through on that boat. But the thing that actually I was impressed by the most was the drive to Milford Sound. The scenery was incredible. It was a couple of hours worth of driving. I was looking out the window whilst trying not to drive off the road. And something that we had planned to do and that I'd researched prior to going on that drive was on the way back from Milford Sound, I wanted to do some hiking. There is some beautiful hiking along that sort of stretch there. Within about an hour of Milford Sound, there were beautiful places to go out hiking. And we ended up doing 3. We did 2 short hikes, about 20 minutes each. I guess they were more like walks than hikes, but they were sort of very beautiful, going out and looking at some water areas, looking at some trees, seeing some birds, going down some really nice established pathways. But then we did one big hike, and it was probably my highlight of the entire trip. It took us about 3 hours, and I definitely considered this one a hike because we were going up the mountain. And it was cold. In some points, as we got further and further up that mountain, there was water on the ground, and that water was frozen. There was no snow, but it was definitely a little bit cold. And that hike was on the side of a mountain with incredible views and lots of bird life. We even saw the local Kia, not the car. It's actually an alpine parrot, which is the only alpine parrot in the world, supposedly. Back at Teanu, we also wanted to do more hiking, and there's this beautiful big trail, a trail that you can do for 4 days. Now, we didn't end up doing a 4-day trek. That's a bit beyond what we wanted to do or the time constraints that we had, but we did part of the trail. We did a half-day hike, and again, when I say hike, this one was actually a pretty easy walk. Had a beautiful trail, but it was absolutely stunning walking through these forests on the edge of the Anu Lake. We stopped halfway along, and we had a look at this beautiful pebble beach, had lunch sitting on the beach. And you'll see now that I'm finally wearing my Christopher Ward. And I've been wearing my Christopher Ward on this particular day as we were doing these multiple hikes, because I knew that we were going to be hiking. I knew that I was going to be sweating, even though it was cold. And I'm glad that I chose to wear the Christopher Ward because, yes, I was a little bit sweaty after all of this walking, and the leather strap on my Mont Blanc may not have been the best one to wear at that time. From Teanu, we drove further south to a small town called Riverton. Riverton's right on the bottom of the South Island. It's a beautiful seaside town with a big inlet, beautiful pebble beaches, a lovely town, lovely size of town, lovely atmosphere of town. But the reason we went there was not because it was a beautiful town, but it was actually the place where my wife grew up. She was there from birth through to around about 10 years old and had not returned since then. And it's been a few decades since she was 10 years old. So it was really nice for us both to go back there, her to see her hometown, and we went and saw her actual house that she grew up in as well. So that was a really nice thing. From there, we drove back up to Queenstown. We had a little bit more time in Queenstown. So what was I going to do? Well, a little bit more walking, but also I really wanted to see that Zenith Defy again. It had been in the back of my head. I wasn't going to buy it. I did not buy it. It's too much money for me to spend on a watch at this time, but it captured my attention enough that I just wanted to experience it again. So yes, I got to try that one on again. From Queenstown, we flew to Brisbane. In Brisbane, I knew I was going to want to try on some more watches. There's a couple of stores that I wanted to try. The one store I wasn't expecting to walk into was Bulgari. Then there's a watch from Bulgari that has always captured my attention. Not that I want to own it, not that I'm interested in owning it. It's captured my attention because I just wanted to experience it. So I got to experience this watch. And look how thin this thing is. I'm sure you're aware of this one. I'm sure you've seen this watch before on videos, but it was just very interesting to actually stick it on wrist. It was amazing actually how comfortable this one was on wrist. I expected it to be thin, but it was even thinner than I realized. And of course I had to try on an IWC because I seem to be a little bit obsessed with IWC. In particular, this is the Portuguesa. It's a nice watch. I've tried it on before, but I'd never tried it on with the bracelet, and I really wanted to get that experience. And thankfully, there was a store in Brisbane that had this particular watch on the bracelet, so it worked out really well. I was hoping that they would, and they did, so I got to try on that lovely IWC as well. Now, I did mention that I did not buy any watches on this trip. That's sort of true, sort of not true, because when I was approaching this time to leave on holidays, I'd been going down a bit of a pathway of vintage watches, and I've been looking out for a vintage watch. And as we started to depart on this trip, I actually found a vintage watch online that I really wanted to own. And I ended up buying it, and I told the guy that I bought it off online, could you possibly send it to my father's address? My father lives in Queensland, just north of Brisbane. I was planning to see him at the end of this trip. We were circling our way around, go spend some time with my father. And this way, it meant that that watch was waiting for me when we got there. So you'll see now I'm wearing my vintage Rado watch. And you'll also see that my father's property has some beautiful views, so it's a very nice place to visit. It's a really nice place to stay, and it's a lovely place that I have available to me whenever I like to go and see him. But wearing this watch really captured my attention, even more than I expected. I kind of hoped that this would be a cool watch to own and wear. I've turned out to be really enjoying it. I love this particular watch. There's also a local sort of bird park near my father's house, which we went and spent some time at as well. Lovely gardens, lovely views, amazing bird life, and I wore that Rado again. I had to get some footage of that Rado too, so I'll probably use that footage in this video, but also maybe in future videos whenever I talk about vintage watches. But I'm home again now, of course. My trip is over, and I wanted just to quickly cover off on the two watches that I took with me, my Mont Blanc and my Christopher Ward. I expected to wear the Christopher Ward the most. It was the more sort of convenient watch to wear, the easier watch to wear, the more obvious watch that I probably should have worn for most of the trip, but I ended up not wearing it a lot. I probably ended up wearing my Mont Blanc for at least 90% of the time. Not that it was probably the most perfect watch for the experiences that I was doing, but it was just a watch that I just could not take off my wrist. It has turned out that not only do I like this watch, but I absolutely love it. And having this time with it has further developed that love for this watch. So I'm really glad that I ended up taking this one with me, because not only did I then get to wear it more because I wanted to wear it more, but it changed my relationship with it. It sort of increased how much I like it, and it also make me feel that it is actually quite easy to wear this watch in different environments than I thought would be appropriate for this watch. Realistically, I'm happy to wear any watches in any environments, but I know when I'm doing things that are physically active, I try not to wear leather straps. It's turned out to be perfectly okay for most of it, but I'm glad I did take that Christopher Ward with me still, because I definitely did end up wearing it sometimes, and it was the appropriate watch for some of those activities. But it was also so nice to sort of round the trip out by coming to my father's house and having that Rado vintage watch waiting for me too. Guys, thanks for watching. I know it's been a slightly different video, so you may not have all enjoyed it, but I now have a video that captures my experiences and my wife's experiences on this holiday, and it's also been nice to share these experiences with you guys. Maybe watch a more watch-related video here.